An 11-year-old girl keyed a control tower microphone at 5:07 in the morning and screamed 2 words at a pilot she'd never met. Pull up. That's it. That's the whole impossible sentence. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that microphone. She was supposed to be doing long division in the corner chair, the one with the torn armrest, because her mother couldn't find a sitter and brought her to work instead. But her mother was on the floor of the tower cab at that exact moment, unable to get enough air to finish a sentence, and 2 aircraft, a cargo plane called Ghost 1 and a regional jet with 81 people on board, were about to occupy the same 600 feet of runway. Nobody in that building had planned for this. Nobody trains for this. Here's what actually happened. In order, starting 4 hours earlier, back when it was still a boring Tuesday night and nobody had any reason to be afraid. Wren Calloway was 11 years old, 4'9", and she was doing math homework in the corner of an air traffic control tower because her babysitter had strep throat and her mother had nobody else to call. This was not new. Wren had spent probably 200 overnight shifts in this exact chair since she was 6. She knew where the good snacks were hidden in the break room. She knew which controller, Denny, always let her have the second donut if she asked before 6 a.m. She knew the sound the coffee maker made right before it finished, a specific dying gurgle, and she knew it so well she could tell you the coffee was ready without looking up from her workbook. "You want the coloring book, son?" Denny asked her that night, the way he asked most nights, sliding a battered folder of airplane outlines across the counter toward her chair. "Got a new box of markers in the break room, too." "I'm 11, Denny." "I know exactly how old you are. Doesn't mean you can't color a 747. She took the folder anyway because turning it down felt like more effort than it was worth, and because some small stubborn part of her still liked coloring the fat cartoon jets even though she'd rather have been listening to the real radios. Denny wasn't wrong about her age. Denny was never wrong about her age. That was the strange part of being the actual kid in a room full of adults. Nobody had to pretend to see you as anything other than exactly what you were. It should have felt simpler than the alternative. Some nights it did. Some nights, listening to her mother work a hard shift, guiding real airplanes full of real people through weather nobody could see, Wren felt about 100 years too young for how much she wanted to help and couldn't. Her mother, Ellen Calloway, worked the local control position that night, headset snug over dark hair pulled back tight, voice carrying that specific evenness Wren had grown up hearing through apartment walls on the nights Ellen practiced her calls out loud in the shower, half out of habit and half because saying things clearly, out loud, calmed her down. Wren had absorbed that voice the way kids absorb their parents' laughs, their parents' worries, without meaning to, without trying. "Fog's supposed to roll in later," Ellen said to Denny, glancing at the weather printout. "Wren, baby, zip your jacket. It's going to get cold in here once that door starts opening and closing." "I'm fine." "Zip it anyway." Wren zipped it. In the inside pocket, her fingers found the small brass stopwatch her mother had given her 2 Christmases ago. Not a toy one, a real one, old, with a groove already worn into the casing by somebody else's thumb before it ever reached Wren's hands. It had belonged to her grandfather, a man Wren barely remembered except as a photograph on her mother's dresser and a handful of stories told at bedtime instead of fairy tales. She wound it now, out of habit, the way she always did, though she couldn't have told you why it mattered to her so much. It just felt, the way certain objects do to certain kids, like something she was supposed to take care of. Somewhere in Ellen's bag, tucked in a side pocket next to her badge and her car keys, sat a rescue inhaler, half empty, the kind she'd carried since she was younger than Wren was now. Nobody in the tower thought about it. Wren didn't think about it either. It was just a fact about her mother, the way some kids' moms carried reading glasses or hand sanitizer, an unremarkable object doing an unremarkable job of sitting quietly in a bag until the one night it wouldn't. "Homework first, coloring after," Ellen said without turning around, because she always knew exactly what Wren was doing even with her back turned, a skill Wren found equal parts comforting and deeply unfair. "It's long division. It's the worst kind of homework." "Life's full of long division, baby. Get it done." Wren got it done mostly, glancing up every few minutes at the runway lights glowing gold through the tower glass, at the dark shape of the sky starting to breathe something soft and gray at its edges. She liked the tower at night better than during the day. During the day it was just a room with windows. At night it felt like the only lit-up place in the whole world, a small warm box floating above a runway that disappeared into darkness in both directions, and everyone inside it doing something that mattered. At 10:04 that night, she had no idea any of it would matter to her specifically. She just finished her 9th long division problem, checked the coffee maker's gurgle, and colored in the tail fin of a cartoon jet, while her mother's voice moved calm and low through the room, guiding real airplanes toward a runway. Wren couldn't wait to be old enough to actually work herself, someday, when someday felt very far away. Around midnight, Marcus stopped by on his way out, coat already on, and crouched down next to her chair the way adults do when they want to seem friendly without actually wanting a conversation. "Staying out of trouble?" "Yep. Good girl." He straightened up, patted the back of her chair once like it was a dog's head, and left. And Wren went back to her workbook without saying what she was actually thinking, which was that she wasn't a good girl or a bad girl. She was just a kid doing math in a room where the real work happened, 3 feet away from her, close enough to hear, too far away to touch. She kept a marbled composition notebook in her backpack that nobody in the tower had ever asked to see. In it, in handwriting that still leaned young, she copied down tail numbers she liked the sound of, aircraft types, the exact wording of calls she found satisfying. Cleared for the option, traffic no longer a factor, phrases that meant nothing outside this room and everything inside it. On the inside back cover, in pencil, she'd written herself a private title she'd never shown anyone, W. Calloway, Tower, not real, not yet, just something she practiced being, quietly, the way other kids practice being astronauts or singers, in the specific privacy of a notebook nobody else was allowed to read. She closed it before Denny could glance over, tucked it back into her bag and picked her pencil back up, and went back to being, as far as anyone in that room could tell, exactly what she looked like, a bored kid waiting for morning. Here is how an 11-year-old ends up knowing things she has no business knowing. Walt Calloway, Wren's grandfather, spent 31 years working control towers, the last 9 of them guiding aircraft through the same kind of coastal fog that Merrow Bay saw most winter mornings. Before that, in the Air Force, he'd talked pilots down through weather using nothing but a headset, a radar scope, and a level voice, in places he never fully explained to his own daughter, let alone his granddaughter. He retired earlier than he wanted to. There had been an incident, a young trainee under his supervision, a corrupted position report, a small plane clipping a hangar roof on a missed approach that should never have needed to be missed at all. The pilot survived. The trainee didn't come back to towers. Walt didn't talk about it much. What he did instead in the years after was teach his own daughter, Ellen, 8 years old at the time, then 9, then 10, a different way of doing the job, the way that didn't rely on a screen that could lie to you. "The radar can lie," he used to tell her. "Your ears can't." He taught Ellen to identify aircraft by engine sound. He taught her to keep time in her head using nothing but a stopwatch and known speeds, the old procedural method controllers used before radar existed at all, the kind still technically legal, still written in a manual nobody read anymore. He taught her because he was afraid, in some part of himself he never fully said out loud, of a system failing a second time the way it had failed once already, and he wanted at least one person in his life who wouldn't be helpless if it did. Ellen became a controller herself. She never needed the old methods, not really, not in 15 years of a mostly ordinary career. But she kept them the way people keep a language they learned from a parent, not because they use it every day, but because using it feels like keeping the parent a little bit alive. And somewhere around the time Wren turned 7, sitting bored out of her mind through 100 overnight shifts with no sitter and nowhere else to be, Ellen started teaching her the same game her own father had taught her. Not as training. As a way to kill 4 hours on a slow Tuesday without a bored 7-year-old climbing the walls. "Close your eyes," Ellen would say, low, quiet, so it wouldn't carry to the other controllers. "Tell me what kind of plane that is." "That's a turboprop." "How do you know?" "It's got that buzzy sound, jets are smoother." "Good. Now tell me if it's coming toward us or going away." It became a private thing between them. A bedtime story that happened at 4 in the morning instead of 8 at night. A way for Ellen to pass down a skill she half believed her daughter would never need any more than she herself had needed it. She taught Wren the stopwatch trick around age 9, how without radar you could still know where a plane was in the sky using nothing but its speed and the time since its last position report, counted out loud, second by second, the same way her own father had taught her on a kitchen table 30 years earlier. "When will I ever actually use this?" Wren had asked once, 9 years old, bored, wanting to get back to her coloring folder. Probably never, Ellen said honestly. But if the day ever comes when the machines stop telling the truth, you'll be glad you know how to listen instead. Wren hadn't understood that sentence any better at 9 than her mother had understood it at 9. She'd filed it away the way kids file away most things adults say with real weight in their voice, as something that mattered, without knowing exactly why yet. There was one night, when Wren was 10, that she got it wrong badly enough to remember it forever. Ellen had given her a made-up scenario, 2 planes, 1 runway, no radar, do the math out loud. And Wren had rushed it, excited, sloppy, and called the numbers 8 seconds off. In real life, 8 seconds was nothing. In the game, 8 seconds got a very stern, very quiet lecture from her mother, the kind with no raised voice in it at all, which was somehow worse than yelling. You don't get to be close, Ellen had said. You get to be right, or you get to say you don't know yet. Those are the only 2 answers that keep anybody alive. Wren had cried a little that night, more from the shame of disappointing her mother than from the words themselves, and Ellen had pulled her into a hug afterward and said quieter, I'm not being mean, baby. I'm being your grandpa. This is the only way I know how to keep him around. And Wren, 10 years old, hadn't fully understood that either, only that her mother's voice had gone somewhere far away for a second, somewhere Wren couldn't follow, and had come back a moment later like nothing had happened. She never called a number sloppy again after that. What she did understand by 11 without anyone explaining it to her directly was her mother's voice. She'd heard it 1,000 times through 1,000 ordinary transmissions, and she knew, the way children know their parents' moods better than anyone else alive, the exact difference between Ellen's normal calm and something underneath it working a little too hard to sound normal. At 4:36 that morning, half asleep over her workbook, Wren heard that second kind of calm in her mother's voice for the first time all night, responding to something on the radar screen that had blinked once and come back. She didn't know what it meant yet. She just looked up, the way you look up at a sound in another room that isn't quite right, and went back to her homework because there was nothing yet to be afraid of. Not yet. By 4:15, fog had settled over Marrow Bay Regional thick enough to swallow the far end of the runway completely. It came in low and patient, the way it always did on this stretch of coast, sliding over the perimeter fence first, then the taxiway lights, then the runway itself, until the whole airport looked like something photographed underwater. In the cockpit of Ghost 1, a small cargo plane inbound from Portland, Captain Reyes Okafor finished a cold coffee and talked about his daughter's dance recital, the one he'd missed last year and was determined to make this time. His first officer, Priya Deshmukh, nodded along, half listening, mostly watching the instruments the way pilots always do underneath the small talk, cross-checking altitude, scanning fuel, keeping one ear open for a tower voice that hadn't said anything unusual yet. That's new, Priya said, nodding at a smear of green on the weather radar that hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier. Probably just moisture, Reyes said. Whole coast is moisture. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't entirely right either. Neither of them thought about it again for the next 11 minutes, because there was nothing yet that demanded thinking about. 3 miles away, Highline 2289 boarded under flat fluorescent light, 81 passengers filing down a jet bridge that smelled like carpet cleaner and jet fuel in roughly equal measure. A grandfather in 14 degrees Celsius fell asleep before the door even closed, chin dropping to his chest the exact way, his daughter would say later, he'd fallen asleep in church for 40 straight years. A woman in 22A, dressed for a job interview she'd rehearsed in a bathroom mirror at 2 that morning, stared at her own reflection in the dark window and silently mouthed her opening line one more time, lips shaping words nobody else could hear. 2 rows back in 24 degrees Celsius, a man in a rumpled suit reread the same paragraph of a work email 4 times without absorbing a single word of it, because his mind kept drifting to the argument he'd had with his wife the night before, one he still hadn't figured out how to apologize for. And at 9 degrees Fahrenheit, a 7-year-old named Dahlia pressed her nose flat against the plastic window and asked her mother for the 4th time whether the fog outside meant the plane was already flying through a cloud, right here on the ground. And her mother said yes, sort of. And Dahlia decided that was the single most interesting fact she had been told in her entire life. In the cockpit, Captain Adiz Bello ran her before-start checklist with First Officer Sam Delacroix, a man 12 years her junior who hummed under his breath when he was nervous, a habit he didn't know he had, and one a days had learned, over 8 months of flying together, to find quietly reassuring rather than annoying, because a nervous man who hums is a man who's still paying attention. Fog's thicker than they called it, Sam said, watching the taxiway lights disappear into gray 30 feet past the nose. It'll lift, a days said, with the specific confidence of someone who'd said that sentence 1,000 times, and been right 990 of them. Coastal stuff always burns off by 6. Neither of them noticed that the tower's frequency had gone very slightly quieter in the background hiss between transmissions, a change no manual teaches a pilot to listen for, the electronic equivalent of a held breath. Back in the tower, Ellen logged the half-mile visibility and reached, without thinking about it, for her jacket pocket, patting it once, the small unconscious check she did most nights, confirming the inhaler was there even though she rarely needed it anymore. It was there. She didn't think about it again. Then he cracked his knuckles and made his usual joke about missing the old CRT scopes, the ones you could smack when they acted up. Wren, half listening from her corner chair, had heard that joke maybe 40 times and still found it funny, mostly because Denny found it funny every single time he said it, laughing at his own bit like it had only just occurred to him. Outside, the runway edge lights bled into soft gold halos in the mist, and beyond them the sky was doing the thing it did most mornings on this coast. Not brightening exactly, just thinning, the black going gray by degrees so slow you couldn't have said the exact moment it happened. Everything looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. A slow, foggy, unremarkable morning. 2 planes on routine schedules. A tired kid finishing her homework in the corner of a warm little room, one eye on the clock, waiting for the coffee maker to finish its dying gurgle so she'd know it was time for Denny's second donut. The first wrong note came at 4:51. It was small. Wren almost missed it, half asleep over her workbook. Ghost One's data tag froze on the radar screen. Not gone, frozen. The little plane symbol kept crawling south. The altitude number next to it stopped moving. 4,200 feet. Stuck. Ellen watched it for 3 full sweeps. She said nothing yet. There was nothing yet to say. Then it fixed itself. 4,100. Normal. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. At 4:56, Denny frowned at his own screen. Huh. What? Ellen said. Ground radar showing a plane parked at gate 3 and taxiing at the same time. That's not possible. He picked up the phone to call maintenance. Correct move, standard move. Outside the glass, the fog had gone from thick to total. It had eaten the far end of the runway 40 minutes ago. Now it was working on the near end too. At 5:02, the surface radar went black. Not flickered, black. A red banner blinked in its place, system fault. NY, Ellen's voice came out flat, looked up, his face changed. The easy warmth drained out of it. Okay, he said. We go manual, position reports, non-radar. We've done this before. They had. Years ago, in training. Once for real, 11 years back. Not in fog like this. Not with 2 aircraft closing on one runway from opposite ends. Wren looked up from her homework. She felt the room change temperature, the way a kid feels a fight starting in another room before any words are said. Ghost 1, Marrow Bay Tower, say your position, Ellen called. Static. Then Reyes Okafor, still thinking about a dance recital. Tower, Ghost 1, 3 miles north, inbound 28, we're in the soup up here. Roger, continue approach, report the marker. At 5:04, Highline 2289 called, ready to taxi. Highline 2289, taxi runway 28 via Alpha, hold short. Correct call, exactly correct. 4 words that should have kept everyone safe. Except that at 5:05, 2 floors below, the same dying relay that had already killed the surface radar finished dying completely, and took the hold short lighting with it, the string of red lights whose only job on a night like this was to glow and say stop here went dark at the exact threshold where it mattered most. Nobody in the tower knew that yet. What Ellen knew at 5:05 was that the room had gone very quiet, the way rooms go quiet right before something breaks. What she also felt at 5:06 was a tightness starting low in her chest, small at first, easy to ignore, the kind of tightness she'd learned to recognize her whole life and had learned, mostly, to manage. She didn't think much of it yet either. There wasn't time to think of it. At 5:07, something shifted in the air of the tower cab. A fine gray haze drifting down from the ceiling vent, almost invisible. The smell of old insulation and hot dust, kicked loose by a ventilation relay that had failed along with everything else. Ellen coughed once, small. She kept talking. Ghost 1, say altitude and ground speed. 1,000 feet, 142 knots. She coughed again, harder this time. Denny glanced at her. She waved him off, one hand, I'm fine, and kept her eyes on the window, on the gray nothing where a runway used to be. Wren was standing now. She didn't remember standing up. She was just up, at the edge of the room, watching her mother's shoulders pull tight in a way she'd never seen them pull before. The third cough didn't stop. It became 4, then 5, a ragged catching sound, and Ellen's hand went to her chest, and the next breath she tried to take didn't fully arrive. Ghost 1, hold, she started, and the word broke apart in her throat. Denny spun around. Ellen? She waved at him again, more urgent this time, one hand pressed flat against her sternum, the other groping for her jacket, for the side pocket, for the inhaler that was there, that was always there, fingers shaking too hard to work the cap. Wren was already moving. She didn't think about it as brave. She didn't think about it at all. She crossed the room the way you cross a room toward your own mother, making a sound you have never once heard her make, grabbed the inhaler out of the bag before Ellen's shaking hands could find it, and pressed it into her palm. Ellen got one shaky puff in, then another. It helped. Not enough, not fast enough. Her breath came in short, high pulls, each one shorter than the last, and when she tried to speak again, only a thin whisper of air came out where a sentence should have been. Outside the glass, Ghost 1's engines were audible now, a low building growl through the fog, closing on a runway with no lights to stop anyone at the wrong end of it. Denny had the second radio in his hand, but Denny had never once run a live non-radar approach outside of a training scenario 9 years old, and everyone in that room, even an 11-year-old, could hear the difference between a man who knew exactly what to do and a man doing his very best guess. Ellen's eyes found Wren's. She couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. But she reached into her own jacket pocket with a shaking hand, passed the inhaler, and pulled out the small brass stopwatch. Not Wren's, her own. The twin Walt had given his daughter the same year he'd given his granddaughter hers. And she pressed it into Wren's hand and closed her daughter's fingers around it, hard, and looked at her with an expression that had no air left in it for words, but didn't need any. You know how. I taught you. Do it. Absolutely not. Denny didn't even look up from the radio. Wren, honey, sit down. Mom can't talk. Wren's voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. She can't get a full breath. You heard her. I heard her cough. I need to call this in and get her outside for air, and I need you to sit in that chair and let the adults handle this. He grabbed the desk phone one-handed, dialed 911 with the other, and while it rang, he stabbed out a text to Marcus with his thumb. Ellen down, med emergency, get in now. Because some part of him, even mid-argument, was already doing 3 jobs at once the way the job required. There's no time to call anyone else. Ghost 1's a minute out, and Highline's already past the hold line. The lights are out, Denny, I can see it. The whole threshold's dark. That's not... We don't know that for certain. The ground radar's down. I'm not reading it off the radar. I'm reading it off the window. He looked. Fog. Gray on gray. Nothing to see, and everything to fear. Sweetheart, this is serious. This isn't a game we play at 4 in the morning to pass the time. This is real airplanes with real people on them, and I love you, but I am not putting a child on that frequency. I'm not asking to be on the frequency because I want to. Something in Wren's voice cracked, not from fear exactly, from the specific fury of being right and not believed at the same time. I'm asking because Mom taught me this for 4 years, and there's nobody else in this room who knows it as well as I do right now. And if you don't let me help her finish what she started, I don't know what happens to that airplane. Denny opened his mouth to argue again. Behind him, Ellen made a sound. Not a word. A rasp, forced out through a throat working too hard for air, but unmistakable in its shape, in the way she jabbed one shaking finger at Wren and then at the microphone, over and over, the universal shorthand of a mother who has run out of oxygen for sentences but not out of conviction. Then he turned. He looked at Ellen's face, gray at the edges now, lips gone pale, chest heaving in short, useless pulls, and then at the stopwatch clutched white-knuckled in an 11-year-old's fist, and something in him gave way, not because he'd stopped being afraid, but because he ran out of a better idea before he ran out of time. "This is not procedure," he said to no one, to the room, to himself. "This is not remotely procedure." "I know," Ren said. "You tell me exact numbers, nothing else. You don't improvise, you don't guess. You say what your mom taught you to say and nothing more." "Okay. And the second, I think it's going wrong. I'm taking that mic back. Do you understand me?" "Yes." He didn't look reassured. He looked like a man stepping off a ledge because the floor behind him was already on fire. But he stepped aside, and Ren moved into the chair that still held the shape and warmth of her mother's body, and she looked at Ellen one more time, gray-faced, one hand pressed to her chest, the other hand giving her daughter a single shaking thumbs up because there was nothing left in her lungs for anything bigger than that. And Ren understood, with a clarity that had nothing to do with her age, exactly what she was being trusted with. Through the window, for just a moment, the fog thinned over the ramp. She caught the shape of Highline 2289 stopped at the hold line, cabin lights glowing gold and soft through the mist, and somewhere behind one of those windows, she knew without being told, there was a kid about her own age looking out at exactly the same fog, waiting for the same morning to be over. Ren picked up the microphone. It was heavier than it looked. The tower cab smelled like burnt dust and old coffee. Somewhere behind Ren, the ventilation fan that had started all of this kept up its stuttering cycle, a small mechanical wheeze that sounded, if she let herself notice it, uncomfortably like her mother's breathing had sounded 4 minutes earlier. She didn't let herself notice it for long. Her own breath was loud in her ears, too fast, and she made herself slow it down the way her mother did before a hard transmission. One long inhale, held, let go, because panicked lungs made a panicked voice, and a panicked voice was the one thing nobody in that fog could afford to hear right now. The microphone was still warm from her mother's hand. Ren keyed it. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. She made it bigger on the next breath. "Highline 2289, Marrow Bay Tower. Confirm your position. Are you stopped short of the runway or on it?" A pause. Too long a pause. "Tower, Highline, we're not 100% sure. Lights went out right as we were taxiing up. We stopped when we heard the abort call, but there's a chance our nose is past the hold line. We can't see the markings in this fog." Ren felt the floor of her stomach drop out. Denny beside her went very still. They might already be on the runway, and they don't know it. "Copy, Highline. Do not move. Do not attempt to reposition. Stay exactly where you are." She said it the way her mother said things when it mattered. Flat, slow, no room in it for panic to get a foothold. Behind her on the floor, Ellen made a small sound. Ren glanced back. Her mother had one hand pressed to the console leg, dragging herself half upright, eyes fixed on her daughter with an intensity that had nothing to do with oxygen and everything to do with will. Ellen held up one finger, then pointed at the stopwatch in Ren's fist. "Start it, now." Ren started it. "Ghost 1, Marrow Bay Tower," her voice again, steadier this time, finding its shape the way a bike finds its balance once it's already moving. "We have a possible runway obstruction we can't confirm visually. I need you to level off at 2,000 feet and hold your position. Do not continue the approach yet." "Tower, Ghost 1, say again, who is this?" Reyes Okafor's voice, wary, confused. He'd heard 2 different voices in the last 90 seconds, and neither of them was the one he'd started the flight with. "This is Marrow Bay Tower local control," Ren said, because that was true technically and the only way that mattered right now. "Our primary controller is down. I'm working this with her right beside me. Level at 2,000 and hold, please." Denny's hand hovered over his own mic, ready to grab it back the second she gave him a reason. She didn't give him one yet. Ellen, on the floor, dragged the legal pad off the console with one shaking arm and wrote 3 numbers on it in handwriting that barely held its shape. She turned it so Ren could see. 140 knots. 215 to threshold. Ask Highline exact heading. Ren read it once, understood it the way you understand something you've practiced 100 times without ever believing you'd need it. "Highline, what heading is your nose pointed, best guess?" 280, give or take. "We're basically parallel to the runway center line, maybe on it, maybe just short. I'm sorry, Tower, this fog is a wall." Ren did the math the way her mother had taught her, on 100 slow Tuesday nights, not with a screen, with her own head, with a stopwatch and a known speed, and the stubborn refusal to guess when she could calculate instead. If Ghost 1 comes straight down the center line, and Highline's nose is anywhere near that line, there's no room. None. Ghost 1, listen carefully. She kept her voice level. I can't confirm the runway is clear. There is a chance Highline's aircraft is sitting on it right now. I need you to hold at 2000 until I tell you otherwise. Do not descend. Copy, holding 2000, Reyes said, and underneath the calm, Ren heard something else now, not doubt exactly, something closer to a man deciding to trust a voice half the size of every voice he'd ever taken instructions from because the alternative was worse. For 11 seconds, nobody in that tower said anything at all. Then the radio spat static, a short, ugly burst, and Ren's next transmission came back to her own ears thin and broken, chewed up by the same failing relay that had already killed everything else in the building that night. Ghost 1, hold it, she said, and heard her own words vanish mid-sentence into a hiss. Tower, say again, you're breaking up. Denny lunged for his own mic. Ren caught his sleeve. Wait. She didn't know why she said it. She just knew, the way she knew her mother's moods, that panic right now would cost more than it saved. A new voice cut through the static. Clear, strong, coming from an aircraft sitting still on the ground instead of one fighting through fog. Marrow Bay Tower. Highline 2289. We can hear Ghost 1 better than you can from here. Want us to relay? It was a dazed bellow. Sitting in an airplane that might, for all she knew, be about to get hit. Offering her radio to a stranger's failing signal instead of demanding answers for herself. Highline, yes, please. Tell Ghost 1 to hold at 2000 and stand by. Adaze relayed it, word for word, her voice carrying across the fog to a cargo pilot she'd never met, on behalf of a controller she couldn't see and hadn't met either. Ghost 1 copies, holding 2000, came back. Relayed again. 4 strangers now stitched together by nothing but the decision to keep helping each other. Ellen on the floor tugged Denny's pant leg. He crouched. She pointed hard at the window, then made a small circling motion with one finger. Tell them to check outside, listen for us. And Denny straightened up fast, understanding faster than he expected to. Highline, he said into his own mic, voice rough. Can your crew hear or see anything at all off your left side? Engine sound, lights, anything? A pause. Then Sam Delacroix's voice, careful. Negative on visual. Wait, negative, hold on. I think I hear something. Very faint. Off our 9 o'clock. Ren's stomach turned to ice. 9 o'clock. That's toward the runway. That's exactly where the center line should be if they're sitting on it. She looked at the stopwatch. 1 minute 40 since Ghost 1 leveled off. Every second they held was a second of borrowed time, because somewhere above the fog a cargo plane was burning fuel it didn't have an infinite amount of, circling a hold point that couldn't hold forever. Ellen wrote again. Fast, sloppy, barely legible. Send Frank out in the ops truck. Have him drive up, confirm Highline's nose is behind the hold line. Do not have them move the aircraft. Ren read it, then looked up. Denny, is Frank still doing his rounds? Break room, Denny said, already grabbing the phone to the ground crew line. Frank, truck, now, headlights on. I need eyes on Highline's nose position at the 28 hold line. Go. Ren keyed the mic. Highline, do not move your aircraft. I say again, stay exactly where you are. We're sending a vehicle out to confirm your position visually. Shut down anything you can to help us hear you if we call out. Copy, standing by, engines at idle, Adaze said. 40 seconds crawled by with nothing but static and the sound of Ellen's ragged breathing beside her. Then Frank's voice crackled through on the ground frequency, tinny through his handheld radio. I've got them. Headlights on the nose. Highline's a good 10 feet short of the hold line. They never crossed it. You're clear to bring Ghost 1 in. Ren closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, the first full second she'd allowed herself since picking up the microphone, and felt the whole room exhale with her. It wasn't over. The tower door banged open. Marcus, soaked from the fog outside, tie undone, took one look at the room. Ellen gray-faced against the cabinet, an 11-year-old standing at the primary console with a headset clamped over her ears. Denny hovering between the two of them like a man trying to be in 3 places, and his voice came out sharper than he probably meant it to. What in God's name is happening in here? She's the only one who can call this approach right now, Denny said, without turning around, without so much as a beat of hesitation. Get maintenance on that lighting circuit. Get the ambulance moving faster, and don't you dare touch that radio. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it again, and picked up the phone instead. Whatever argument he'd walked in with, it didn't survive contact with the sight of Ellen Calloway's hand still locked, white-knuckled, around her daughter's ankle. Ghost 1. Marrow Bay Tower. Steadier now. Highline is confirmed clear of the runway. I need you to begin your approach. No glide slope, no radar. I'm going to call your altitude by time and speed. You fly heading and rate. If my numbers in your altimeter don't match, you go around, no discussion. Copy, Reyes said. We're trusting you, Tower, whoever you are. The radar can lie. Your ears can't. Her mother's voice in her own head, in her mother's father's voice before that. 3 people deep, arriving exactly when she needed it. She started the stopwatch clean. Turn final, heading 080, begin descent. 500 feet a minute. She'd picked 500 on purpose. Slower than a normal approach, because slower meant more time to spot the runway, and more time was the only cushion they had left. Left 080 out of 2,000. 30 seconds, you should be at 1750. A pause, then 1760, close, Tower. 60 seconds, 1500. 1510, on profile. Denny had stopped breathing through his own nose, watching the numbers, watching an 11-year-old call an airplane's altitude within 20 feet, using nothing but a stopwatch and her own 2 ears. Ellen, on the floor, mouthed the numbers a half-second before her daughter said them. Silent, perfectly in time, a rhythm the two of them had built without ever once believing they'd need to perform it. 90 seconds, 1250. Getting close now. Look for the lights. They may be weak, but they should be there. 3 seconds of nothing. Negative, Reyes said, and his voice had an edge in it now that hadn't been there before. Negative contact, Tower. Gray all the way down. If I don't see something in the next few seconds, I'm going around. Wren's grip on the stopwatch tightened. And that was the exact moment she remembered, with the specific, total clarity of a fact arriving 1 second before it becomes useless, that Frank had confirmed the nose was short of the hold line, driving up from the front in the ops truck, headlights catching only what was directly ahead of him. Nobody had gone around to check the tail. And Highline had stopped mid-turn, angled onto the runway centerline taxiway, exactly the kind of turn where a jet's tail swings wide of its nose, sometimes 10, 15 feet wide, a fact every controller learns and every pilot forgets they ever needed to know until the one night it matters. 2 very different lines. She had not asked which one. She looked at the stopwatch. She looked at the dark window. She did the math in the half-second she had left to do it, the way her mother had taught her to do math when there wasn't time to be scared of getting it wrong. If Highline's tail is still swung out toward the center line even a little, if Ghost 1 comes down where my numbers say he will, she didn't finish the thought. There wasn't time to finish thoughts anymore. Ghost 1, pull up. She screamed it. Not the calm procedural phrase her mother would have used, not go around, nothing that sounded like a controller at all. Just the 2 rawest words in the English language, the ones an 11-year-old's whole body reached for without asking permission from training. Pull up! Pull up now! Reyes Okafor didn't hesitate. He would say later to investigators that something in that voice, too high, too young, too certain, hit some part of his brain that bypassed every year of training and went straight to instinct, and his hand slammed the throttles forward before his mind had finished deciding to trust it. The ATR-72 howled out of the fog 40 feet above the threshold, gear still down, engines screaming full power, and cleared the tail of Highline 2289, whose tail it would turn out had swung nearly 15 feet wider than its nose during that blind rushed turn onto the taxiway close enough into the runway's protected area that nobody checking only the front of the aircraft could have known. By a margin so thin that Sam Delacroix would spend the rest of his career unable to say the number out loud without his hands going cold. The cargo plane clawed back up into gray nothing, climbing, alive, its landing gear grazing nothing but fog. Outside, the fog didn't part or lift or do anything dramatic at all. It just sat there, indifferent, the same gray it had been for the last 2 hours, as if nothing underneath it had almost gone wrong in a way that would have made the local news for a decade. For the length of one full breath, nobody in that tower made a sound. Ellen, on the floor, reached up and found her daughter's ankle and held it, and that was all either of them needed. Paramedics reached the tower 9 minutes later. By then, Ellen's breathing had eased enough to manage short, real sentences, though her voice stayed thin and rough for the rest of that day, like something worn down and not yet grown back. She said the first one to Ren. "You did it right." Barely more than a whisper. "Every number. You did it exactly right." Ren didn't answer. She just held her mother's hand while the paramedics checked her oxygen, and Denny hovered close enough to be useless and useful at the same time, refilling a water bottle nobody had asked for, straightening a chart on the wall that didn't need straightening, because some men handle fear by finding something small to fix. Marcus was already on the phone with the regional office, voice gone flat and procedural. Equipment failure, controller medical emergency, non-radar approach executed under duress, no injuries, request full inspection. It was strange, Ren thought. Listening from the floor beside her mother's stretcher, hearing the worst 9 minutes of her life folded down into a sentence that sounded like a weather report. A day's bellow called the tower 40 minutes later, once her jet had been towed clear, and her passengers bussed to the terminal through fog finally starting to burn off. She asked for whoever was on the radio, and when Denny explained carefully exactly who that had been, there was a long pause on the line. "Put her on," Ade said. Not a request. Ren took the phone with a hand that hadn't fully stopped shaking. "I've flown for 22 years, Ade said. "I want you to know that. 22 years, and I've never trusted a voice the way I trusted yours today. I don't care how old you are. You did a pilot's job with a kid's voice, and both of those things are true at once, and I am not going to forget it." She told her briefly about the cabin, a grandfather in 14 degrees Celsius who slept through the abort and woke up asking if they'd hit a bird, a woman in 22A who somehow still made her job interview on time, a girl about Ren's own age in 9 degrees Fahrenheit who wanted to know, the second the wheels stopped, whether they were done flying through the cloud on the ground now. Ade's laugh telling it. It was the first real laugh either of them had managed all morning, and Ren held on to the sound of it longer than she held on to almost anything else from that day. By the time the sun actually broke through, thin and pale over a runway still slick with fog damp, Ellen was sitting up on a gurney in the ambulance bay, oxygen tube clipped under her nose, color coming back into her face in slow patches. Ren sat beside her on the bumper, both stopwatches, hers and her mother's, lined up next to each other on her knee, their two worn grooves nearly matching. "I was so scared," Ren said, finally quiet now that there was room for it. "I know, baby." Ellen's voice still cracked on the edges. "I was scared too, the whole time." "You didn't sound scared on the radio before. You never sound scared." "That's not the same as not being scared." Ellen reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear, an ordinary gesture, the kind she'd done 1,000 mornings before school. Nobody who does this job right is ever not scared. You just don't let the fear pick up the microphone instead of you. Ren thought about that for a while, the two of them sitting in the cool morning air, an ambulance idling nearby, a runway going quiet again behind them. She didn't ask if it was over. She didn't need to. She could feel in the specific tiredness settling into her own small body that something had shifted permanently, the way a bone sets differently once it's actually been broken. 3 weeks later, a local news van showed up at their apartment building, and a reporter with very white teeth asked Ren, on camera, whether she'd always dreamed of being a hero. "Not really," Ren said honestly, which made her mother laugh so hard later that evening she had to use her inhaler again, this time from laughing instead of fear. "I mostly didn't want anything bad to happen to my mom." The clip got clipped down online to 11 seconds and shared a few 100,000 times, and for about a week kids at school looked at her differently, some in awe, one boy in her class oddly angry about it, as if her being on the news had personally cost him something. Ren found she didn't much like any version of being looked at differently. She missed, more than she expected to, the version of herself nobody had noticed at all, the kid in the corner chair, unremarkable, coloring a cartoon jet nobody was watching her color. Ellen went back to work 6 weeks later, cleared by her doctor, carrying a second inhaler now instead of one, just in case. Ren still came in on nights the sitter fell through, though there were fewer of those nights now. Something about what happened had made 3 different neighbors suddenly, permanently available to watch her, which Ellen found both convenient and a little bit sad, the way people show up after the emergency instead of before it. A man from the regional FAA office called eventually not to reprimand anyone. There was no clean rule to reprimand. Nothing in any manual anticipated an 11-year-old on frequency, but to ask, carefully, almost apologetically, whether Ellen would consider talking to their safety office about contingency planning for single-controller medical events. Ellen said she would think about it. She did think about it, for a long time, and what she mostly thought was that no policy anyone wrote in a conference room would ever account for the actual thing that had saved that airplane, which wasn't a policy at all. It was a stopwatch, and a habit, and 4 years of a bored kid keeping her mother company on slow nights for no better reason than that neither of them had anywhere else to be. On a quiet Sunday a month after, mother and daughter sat together in the tower cab during a slow overnight shift. The scopes fixed, the lighting circuit rewired, everything ordinary again in the specific way that only makes sense to people who've watched ordinary almost disappear. "Can I ask you something?" Wren said, working on homework she wasn't really doing. "Always." "Grandpa taught you this. You taught me. Did he ever think you'd actually need it?" Ellen was quiet for a moment, watching a small plane's lights blink steady through the dark beyond the glass. "No," she said. "I don't think either of us ever thought that. I think he just wanted to give me something of his that a screen couldn't take away. I think that's the only reason I ever gave it to you too. I didn't do it so you'd be ready for this. I did it because it was the only thing of him I had left to hand you." Wren turned that over for a while, the way she turned over most things her mother said with that particular weight in her voice. "Do you wish I hadn't needed it?" Ellen reached over and put her hand flat against her daughter's back, the same gesture she'd used 1,000 ordinary nights to steer her toward the coloring folder, the snack table, the good chair by the window. "Every single day," she said, "and I will never once stop being glad you had it anyway." Outside the glass, a jet climbed out through clean, unbroken sky, its lights shrinking to a small, steady point, and Wren watched it go until it was nothing at all, just a sound fading into a morning that had no idea how close it had come to being a very different one.